Hey everybody, welcome back to our weekly podcast. Guess what? It's not Friday. My name is Patrick Tan, General Counsel for ChatArgos. We are the blockchain intelligence firm that discovered Binance's BUSD was under-collateralized by 1.4 billion US dollars. With me every week, as usual, our CEO and Chief Data Scientist, Jonathan Reiter. Thank you for tuning in. Yes, that's right. It is Monday. You usually receive this on Friday, or depending on where you're from, maybe Thursday or maybe Saturday. Well,
Not Thursday.
well, maybe not. Yeah, that's true. That's not Thursday. It's not possible. Well, anyway, it is Monday. That's because I've been away on vacation. It is the end of the year. Some of us are going to be away on vacation. So, but that doesn't mean the recording stops, and as the news doesn't stop as well. So this week we're going to talk to you about ordinal problems, a favorite topic of ours. Is the ordinal problem that you've seen on Bitcoin spreading to other chains? Jonathan will tell us more about that. We're going to talk to you a little bit about the FoundryPro pig butchering scam. So you may not know about this because it's a relatively obscure Florida lawsuit, but turns out it actually leads to a much, the size of this is mucho grande. It's pretty big, and a lot of people may not know about that. We'll talk a little bit about that as well. And finally, Belgian politicians being compromised using crypto. Well, very short commentary about that. Talk a little bit about the Financial Times expose and why intelligence agencies and politicians and governments all over the world should be paying attention to what's going on right within their backyards. So let's just jump straight into ordinal problems. John, this is pretty technical. This is kind of really beyond me. But maybe
Okay, we went through some of this stuff, 2 weeks ago
2 weeks
or so,
ago,
where
that's
there's
right.
Bitcoin having problems. So ordinals are a way of making use of tiny amounts of cryptocurrency, attaching some other information, NFT-esque, whatever style. Bitcoin was extremely clogged because people were trading individuals. Generally, this is a thing you do to the smallest possible denomination, so one sat in that case, so 1/100 millionth of Bitcoin, which is worth effectively zero. And you're now seeing this spreading to other chains where people are inscribing information on the tiniest amount of tokens on whatever. I mean, Arbitrum had a problem over the weekend, and this is starting to flare up in a number of places. It is amusing because, this idea that you can make these tokens more divisible, I mean, okay, there's no computer problem with that.
Yeah.
Money tends to be divisible down to the smallest kind of economically useful unit.
Correct.
Because having excess amounts historically of coins and whatever of tiny transactions is a real problem. History is replete with currencies that lose value and then the small denominations are removed. So, for example, there are no fractional yen. Before World War II, there were fractional yen. I think they had both hundredths and thousandths. They stopped after the war when the yen was 300 and something to the US dollar, and that's something like a cent, and that's fine. There are no fractional Indonesian rupiah anymore. There used to be. I have a 2.5 rupiah note at home. There's no fractional Vietnamese dong, etc. This is a feature of lots of currencies that have small bits. I remember when Austria was still on the shilling, and you could get pfennigs, which were fractions of shillings. It's something like 15 Austrian shillings to €1. So 1 cent of 1 shilling was worthless, and they stopped using, I think, the 5 and 10 pfennig coins, and these weren't even usable. They were just in little bowls at shops, and nobody, you left them, took them, they were worthless. You couldn't use them. Singapore stopped using 5-cent coins.
Oh, we stopped using pennies for a while.
Quite a while ago.
Yeah.
The 5-cent coins. They tend to lob stuff off. Trading, 1/100 millionth, or in the case of some Ethereum style stuff, 1/10 to the 18th of a token is. These are economically totally worthless, but if you're going to decide to ascribe meaning to that, the amount of throughput your system needs to have all of a sudden becomes crazy.
So talk to us a little bit about what happened to Arbitrum over the weekend.
Well, just super clogged, right? So people are assigning huge amounts of value to tiny fractions of transactions and trying to send them place to place. And the process of assigning the value requires publishing some whatever data. They use a different technique than used on Bitcoin, but it doesn't matter. You're just gluing some arbitrary data to some individual SAT, some tiny unit of whatever token on the network. And the volume there could be super huge, right? Because people decide, this is something we're going to do. And the amount of the token that gets used up, you can break one ETH into 10 to the 18th pieces. That's a lot of pieces. And if people all of a sudden decide they want to inscribe them, it looks just like NFT mints a while ago because it's the same problem.
Yeah.
50,000 people racing to do the same thing at once and fees spike, whatever. Now, there's no reason for the software to fall over if it's well written and there's a sensible consensus mechanism. The problem is that all these people are starting to discover, first of all, the software is not terribly well written. It gets debugged. They had, problems to running out of memory and whatnot. Okay, Solana had that issue to some extent. These networks are falling apart because a lot of these proof-of-stake style consensus mechanisms don't fracture very well. And if there start to be cascades of overruns and stuff getting out of sync and the network is forking, it's difficult to keep it on the rails. So things tend to go down and they need to be reassembled. That is an inevitable consequence of trying to do this. If you think about the way Visa would work, if we all of a sudden decided you could trade 1/1,000,000th of a cent, but it had some uniqueness value, and you had to do something to all of a sudden Visa to be processing huge amount of transactions, Visa would simply throttle the network. The problem is that for internally policed consensus mechanisms like proof of stake related, proof of delegated, whatever, all this stuff, there is no way internally to throttle other than people competing to present different stake, different versions of the network. The code can even have maximum buffer sizes. Fine, everybody could sort of agree to that. Whatever. Even if people do that, you'll have different contents in all the different buffers and be duking it out. And if things start to time out and fall over, and some of your peers did not manage to stay up and enforce the buffer size limits correctly or whatever, people come back up and they see fractured versions of the network, things go down. This is going to ruin everything because it's not a reliable way of operating a system. This is what I was told was an irrelevant corner case that's now causing things to crash routinely. I will add that it's fairly easy to cause on low fee L2s because the cost of doing it is very low. So knocking these things over is not terribly difficult. This is a theme on this podcast. The beatings will continue until morale improves. So there you go. Don't expect that problem to get fixed. There were proposals to remove the ordinals concept from Bitcoin because Ethereum is supposed to handle arbitrary data in the way the smart contract platform works, the call data, whatever. The technical details are irrelevant. Bitcoin is, at least some people think, supposed to simply be a transferring and payments type network, and the smart contracting capability is limited, and there are at least a significant minority of participants who'd be fine with further limiting the smart contract functionality. Ethereum, no one's okay with that. The whole raison d'etre of the system is a world computer, arbitrary, whatever, scripting. So you can't really eliminate that from EVM-style chains without ruining the entire purpose of the system. So, it's going to be interesting to watch how that goes. If you want really low fees and all of a sudden people get super, super horned up for not only low fees, but the value of the underlying thing is tiny, and it's the native token. So there's nothing else to even worry about here. Stuff will fall over.
To sort of like put this in a way that some of our less technical listeners would understand, is that imagine, so for instance, and this is pretty common in many parts of the world, they require that there be a minimum spend before you can use a credit card. It's very common in Australia especially. If you're going to use a credit card to pay for the transaction, you need to spend above a certain amount.
Common here. The best bakery in the country makes you spend at least $10
before you can whip out your credit card.
Means if you run there and only get 2 baguettes, you have to scan a QR code.
Correct.
Sometimes your phone's wet. It's a problem.
So now imagine a network now, right, where any transaction could, will go through, and that's why it gets clogged up, and that's why you have these sort of like gates where because it for the merchant, right, who's allowing you to use a credit card, it costs them a certain amount of fees, like a certain percentage, and below a certain percentage there's a certain minimum sum below which it actually costs more for the merchant to allow you to use a credit card. And which is why they have the minimum spend requirement. That's something that the system, which was free transactions, they never inspected the economic value of the underlying transaction, and that's why we have this problem coming up. That's why Visa's not designed that way.
Well, so in the case of Visa, whatever, the minimum fees are in the tens of cents, and you have to spend 5, 10, 20, whatever dollars. Certainly their marginal transaction cost, the Visa's cost, isn't 30 cents.
Yeah.
The point here is that the underlying thing that you're transacting is worth 100 millionth or less, 1 billionth, 100 billionth. Those are properly irrelevant amounts, and that Visa's transaction processing cost does exceed 1/100 billionth of a dollar, because I mean that's really zero. So there are various reasons that those gates exist, but some kind of gating is required, or a proof of stake system like this will fall apart. The beauty of the way Bitcoin works is that the system won't go down because of the proof of work. But when you try and have these cascade failures in proof of stake, the system really will go down, and there's really nothing you can do about it.
So switching gears a little bit, let's talk a bit about this Florida lawsuit that was brought to our attention sometime last week, and then I was away, so now we're going to talk about it this time. It's a pig butchering scam. Just so people understand what a pig butchering scam is, the name doesn't come from pigs. It just basically comes from the analogy, because we've had those questions like, are you against pork or what? No, just for the record, we both love pork. We love bacon. Beer batter bacon would be great. So anyway. Pig butchering scam basically means that just as you would fatten up a pig before you kill it, similarly, these scams tend to be where the mark is fattened up. Like, you keep getting the mark to keep sending bigger and bigger transactions, bigger and bigger amounts of money to the fake exchange or the fake website or whatever the case may be. So you don't take him at the small amounts. You just keep fattening him up until finally you pull the plug and steal all the money.
It's scams like, oh, I need you to send me another $5,000 before I can release your trading profits that were fake in the first place.
Or I fake the trading profits initially. Like, oh, you've achieved so much from such a small amount. Why don't you send a larger amount? You can make you even more money, and that's how you sort of like fatten up the.
Well, then there's a fee to get that larger amount.
So you fatten up the pig for the slaughter, so to speak.
If you Google this, there's all kinds of
examples. Correct. So again, nothing against pork. So anyway, what was brought to our attention, a victim in Florida got default judgments against some people for about $2 million. What was interesting about the lawsuit that was brought to our attention was that a whole bunch of addresses was revealed in the judgment itself, and that led us into some investigations. Most of them were exchange deposit addresses, and FTX, Binance, BitCup, OKX, the usual suspects. But the total size of the exchange deposits through these addresses was $450 million, which is a lot of money if you think about it. And that was really quite interesting. And it's unlikely that in this one court case, one plaintiff contains all the addresses. So it's possible that these were funded by withdrawals of the same funds. It's possible that this is a hell of a lot bigger than anybody's even anticipating.
I mean, it's also possible that those deposits are not simply for this pig butchering scam, but are from some service provider that's related to the scammers. I mean, there are a number of ways this could go, which would tell you at least something about how money flows are occurring in the darker parts of the ecosystem. I mean, I do think it's unlikely a group of pig butchering scammers have extracted $500 million from people. It's probably some dodgy money laundering operation adjacent to them, or they're running other scams or whatever. Although they did get over $2 million out of one guy in Florida, which is impressive in some sense.
Yeah, so if you think about it, right, it's not. People say, oh, it's a scam. How much could have possibly been stolen? It adds up. And if it's one dude in Florida who got $2 million like scammed from him, that's just one guy. Who knows how much the sheer scale of this stuff. And Zeke Fo from Bloomberg, who wrote that in his book Number Go Up, he covers this quite. He talks about pig butchering scams and stuff like that. But even I would not have guessed the size of this. And this is just one scam that we investigated. Can you imagine the rest?
I mean, so one guy, 2.2 million, 200 such people is 440 million, which now I would not think that it's possible there are 200 victims of one scam that each are out $2.2 million. But honestly, I'm astonished that a guy in Florida got taken for $2.2 million
but
by
then
some
you would have said
Chinese
because
pig
it's
butcher
Florida,
scam.
it makes sense.
Well, so I actually don't feel like I can estimate the stuff anymore. I could be convinced, given sufficient data, that these guys really were making on the order of $1 billion a year out of this thing. I don't know. I mean, 500 people at $1 million each doesn't feel insane for a global scam when you have an example of one person with $2 million.
If you reduce the quantums, increase the number of people who get scammed. Like say if you
I can believe there's 10,000 victims for $100 each. I have no problem believing that. That's only $1 million though. That's what's confusing. But
well, 10,000 people at maybe $10,000 each.
Yeah, no, I can believe these are large numbers.
Yeah.
I'm open to
So that's if you want to read out more about this stuff, we did put up some of the research. We're going to be producing a much more substantive piece of research down the road in cooperation with some other friends of ours. It's a tweet from December 11th, around about those periods of time. Just have a look on our Twitter profile.
I would note, just sort of by way of passing here, that the two largest amounts of deposits to exchanges were deposits to FTX and Binance, and that they were primarily using FTX and then migrated over to Binance after FTX disappeared. They didn't exactly stop at that time. They stopped whatever a bit in advance. I don't know that currently tells us anything, but I do wonder if once we start to have a better understanding of how this ecosystem operates, that might prove to mean something. Like some of the people affiliated with the FTX Genesis block things may or may not be related to, I mean, again, the Zeke Fox and plenty of other reporting that people in the Southeast Asian border casino area stuff are related to pig butchering scams.
Yeah.
And you'd have to think there's some overlap with the Genesis block OTC business in those countries, because I don't think there are that many people transacting commercial amounts of dollars in stable coins in bags with crypto, whatever. Like, that's got to be a small operation.
Yeah.
Cambodia, Vietnam.
It's hard to say.
Vietnam got a lot of people. Doesn't have a lot of people doing that. And
Yeah.
Laos, whatever. So it is very believable that they migrated away from FTX to Binance because they were historically associated with Genesis block type activities, and that simply was no longer available. We don't know that, but that would make sense and would be consistent with the facts we've seen so far. We have a history of guessing things like that and then being able to prove it later. So we'll see what happens.
So finally, very quickly, let's just talk about the Financial Times front page news.
This is all over the European newspapers.
Oh, it's huge. So basically, Beijing security services, whatever the case may be, there were some operatives who were using actually crypto to, suggesting that crypto would be the way that they would pay to compromise some of these politicians.
Well, so there's a guy, a Belgian politician, who has been. I mean, there's no legal proceedings, right?
No.
And I don't even know that this is illegal in Belgium. He was simply taking money from some asserted to be Chinese government operatives to support Chinese policies and stuff in Belgium. Whatever. I mean, he's a politician. I do not have any idea what the laws are in that direction in Belgium. So let's just assume that's fine. And the reporting indicates that the guy was being paid in crypto using Binance.
Yep.
That's I think it's attributed to Western intelligence sources. Whatever you think of the government's ability to surveil the financial system, spying agencies surveilling politicians taking money from other governments is exactly the middle of their target area of work, right? So one would expect that Western intelligence agencies were looking at this stuff, the crypto's ancillary, incidental, whatever. One interesting thing to note, and it's worth reading the pieces just to get a sense for how with it these people were or are, you would think that his attempts to off-ramp the crypto, I mean, this is a guy who even makes a joke about how I don't know how to do this. What is the exact quote? How do you do crypto? I'm old.
Let's just read this. So for those of you who don't have an FT subscription, although I highly recommend it, we go, I now use, the operative says, I now use cryptocurrency to transfer the support. The politician goes, how do you do crypto? I'm an old school guy. The guy responds, Binance. The politician responds, okay. And then the operative, the spy or whatever the guy is, next week I will transfer to you some for a test. He says it gives a green check mark. Then the operative says you will like it that way, convenient and safe.
Yeah, so it's okay, fair enough, and that whatever, no real opinion on what's going on there. I would simply note that if you're trying to pay a politician who is not really a tech person, who isn't interested in any of this at all, who just wants the money, the off-ramping may well be something that makes it very easy to surveil, particularly because if you're a politician, you'd expect that once there's some suspicion that maybe you're doing something weird, and this guy had been openly taking positions that were uncommon in Western Europe, not without support, but uncommon in Western Europe, tracking his banking and figure out what's going on is really easy for the police if you're an MP and they have real suspicions. They go to the Prime Minister, the Prime Minister says, so that is not the type of person you'd expect to have good OPSEC. And it is funny because traditionally, spy movies, James Bond movies, whatever, you'd pay him in some random offshore bank. It's actually, well, or cash.
Cash.
Or you'd pay him in some, thing, no electronic. It's easier to catch him if he's using Binance and making bank transfers than it was if he was using a proper offshore bank and dealing with stuff that way, because that system was set up to make this better. Maybe that's pro-crypto, maybe it's not, but of course it means it's easier for the government to catch anybody that doesn't really know what they're doing. Maybe that's good, maybe that's bad. It's a different feature of the system. You'd also think that once they recognize the patterns, it's a lot easier to find other people, which again may well be good. This may be an argument in favor or against using a lot of this way of transferring things. I do think that because it's easier, it will be less likely to be used in this way by some of these people going forward. And if you want to pay an old person that says they don't know how to do it, maybe that won't be the way they do this going forward, because when his account at whatever large bank in Belgium, I'm not even sure anymore, flags the incoming wire, there you go. Again, we go back to the Elliot Spitzer case that people can Google, where he was making suspicious cash transactions, and the government was concerned that the FBI was concerned. He was the governor of New York. We're concerned that he was...
Attorney General.
No. He was then governor.
Governor.
Okay. He'd been elected governor after. That he was, somebody was bribing him or whatever, some weird... Because, large cash transactions for a politician is, of course, suspicious and should be surveilled, because that's how the world works. And they ended up discovering some unrelated, non-political stuff that got him in trouble and divorced. So, anyway...
But on that note, thank you for tuning into the Monday episode. There will be an episode on Friday. I'm back. And then maybe happy holidays? I don't know. We'll see. But thank you for tuning in. Thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. Thank you for your comments, your questions. Please don't forget to like and subscribe. It helps the algorithm, helps us out as well to produce this content for you. And then we'll see you on Friday. Bye-bye.